Does anybody else feel like every single Dead by Daylight update these days is a complete and total dumpster fire? I mean, seriously, we can't just have something nice. It's awful. It feels like each and every DBD patch is like a game of Russian roulette where the entire magazine is loaded with live rounds. Either one side is unhappy or the other side is unhappy, or both. Usually both. This makes it really hard for a knucklehead like me to make videos on topics surrounding the game that aren't super topical. Again, it's the same problem I had with the Sinister Grace update, where I'm pressured to make a video about something I originally wasn't planning to because, well, after a while it gets pretty hard to avoid the massive elephant in the room currently breaking everything. First world problems, I guess. Well, this has always been the case with DBD, and specifically behavior's choices surrounding the game. It feels so much worse as of late. It really feels like we can't have a big update without there being some insane changes that make people want to strangle each other. It feels like this problem really started with the Walking Dead chapter and has just gotten progressively worse with every new update, with Sinister Grace really being where this problem got especially noticeable. Sure, behavior's track record has never been spotless. In fact, you'd have a hard time finding a point in the game's history where those spots left enough room for the general consensus to be positive. Part of that is because the DBD community tends to be negative most of the time, which is in large part due to the asymmetricality of the game. One side will always feel like they're getting the short end of the stick, but the other reason is that, well, behavior has a back and forth attitude when it comes to how much they really listen to their community. Behavior can say over and over again that they're listening to their player base, but as we all know, actions speak louder than words, and their actions tend to leave a lot to be desired. Unless you've been living under Patrick Starr's rock, you've probably heard about or even seen the recent uproar going on in the community about the most recent PTB. Trust me, it's hard to ignore. When even Otz is making a video about it, you know it's bad. That poor guy has been through it. Bro is absolutely screaming into the void. It feels like we all are. But if even he can't get through to behavior, well, there's a good reason for the doom and gloom mentality going on right now. I fear we may be cooked, chat. I could spend this video talking about the controversial changes going on right now, but I feel like way more influential people than me have already said what I would have said had I tried to tackle those individual changes. I'm sure most of you cutie patooties watch Scott, so I'm sure you already have your opinion set in stone. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I want to focus on an issue that I think is more fundamental to the other issues going on right now. While people might be focusing on the individual problems, I want to take a step back and focus on the bigger picture, analyzing the macro play instead of the micro play for those of you who are DBD brain rotted like I am. There's a big thing connecting these controversial changes, and it's something that I'm not seeing many people talk about. I believe the reason behavior's had such trouble with the recent updates is rooted deep into their attempts to make Dead by Daylight simpler and easier to understand. While it sounds like a good idea on paper, I think they're going about it all wrong. Today I want to talk about the dumbing down of Dead by Daylight. When taking a distant look at Dead by Daylight, the game seems really simple. The killer's job is to, well, kill, and the survivor's job is to, you guessed it, survive. On the surface level, there's not much to it. You don't need a master's degree to understand what the point of the game is. It's literally in the name of the roles, survivor and killer. However, it's when you take a closer look that the game becomes complicated. There are over 40 survivors in the game with 3 teachable perks? Damn, that's a lot. There are also over 40 killers in the game with the same number of perks and a unique power that only they have? Yeesh, that sounds like a pain in the ass to learn. There's nearly the same amount of maps in the game, which are all RNG dependent for the most part. Jesus Christ. The closer you look, the more you begin to understand why Dead by Daylight might be really hard for Timmy 2-Hour to understand when starting the game. Sure, from a promotional standpoint, there's not much to explain. I mean, for crying out loud, it's a game about running around pieces of wood, which is hilarious to think about given how serious I and so many other people take the game. It's not exactly rocket science, despite how we treat it from time to time. However, it's when you decide to dig a bit deeper that you begin to understand why people have a hard time grasping the game without content creators explaining it to them. There's a very big reason for that, a reason which is completely isolated from the actual complexities of the game. That being, Dead by Daylight's tutorial sucks complete dingling. If you've played that tutorial, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, sure, it gives you the basics, the very basics, like how to do generators, how to stun the killer, as well as other things for each role individually. However, there's a lot which is left out from that tutorial. Things like perks, more complex looping, and probably most importantly, the grander scope of macro play. This creates a massive problem for new players, where the more intricate nuances of the game end up slipping through their fingers and they end up going through their matches completely blindfolded. While a tutorial obviously can't explain everything, behavior's lack of expansion on new player onboarding makes things difficult difficult for those players. However, this isn't news. I don't think you're watching this video mouth agape because you just can't fathom the idea of new players being put through the ringer while trying to understand the game. It's not like I've unveiled a huge secret that people didn't know about. It's practically common knowledge. However, this is where the problem starts, and also why I think we're in the position we are in right now, being the much more troublesome updates we've been getting. Behavior seems to be well aware of how terrible their new player experience is, and it's something they've been trying to correct for some time now. However, the way they've been doing this has been not great. Well, not even good. Actually, it's been pretty terrible. Oh, players are complaining about slugging? Well, time to give them a stupid-ass bar that fills over time and doesn't reset after being downed. Oh, people are bitching about tunneling? Well, I guess it's time to give survivors 80 status effects to prevent the killer from even looking in their general direction after they get unhooked. Okay, cool. What do killers get in return? Well, I do genuinely have to give Behavior props for trying to fix these issues in a way other than the band-aids that are perks. They're doing it in a way that, well, sucks. From those changes I just mentioned to the palette density update to what seems like Behavior trying their hardest to help players escape despite a complete lack of skill on their end, it seems like they're just trying to hold survivor players' hands while the killers are busy drowning in the deep end of the pool filled with pallets an arm's length away. Playing killer right now is such a miserable experience because survivors can just drop pallets like there's a fire sale and rarely get punished because they can probably just get to another pallet by the time the killer breaks the one they just dropped. My heart goes out to anyone playing a weaker killer in this economy. There's a reason everyone and their mother is playing Kaneki right now. So why exactly is this happening? Why does Behavior feel the need to do something so drastic about unfun playstyles? Well, like I said, the new player experience is pretty terrible. There's so much that goes unsaid to explain the game to new players, and Behavior's inability or unwillingness to care to expand on their tutorial in helpful ways makes it so those players don't understand how the game works. Yeah, being tunneled sucks, and new players might complain about it without understanding why exactly the killer made that choice. The same goes for slugging. However, Behavior's choice to tackle these issues by simply making it harder to do for the killer without making survivors aware of how to handle those situations instead is a level of hand-holding and coddling that no developer should allow to happen. That would be like trying to teach a teenager to drive, but instead of actually letting them take the wheel and learn, you just drive while they're forced to watch. How are they gonna learn if you're doing all the heavy lifting for them? On the other end, if killers are tunneling, it's important that they know exactly what choice they're making. A newer killer will probably target whichever survivor is the weakest without understanding the problems involved while doing that. It's not the killer's fault, it's Behavior's for not explaining the high risks that come with playing like that. From the killer's angle, they're making the smart choice by chasing the most vulnerable survivor at the time. They don't get that they might end up going against one out of the 20 anti-tunnel perks in the game. Newer killers aren't going to know how many status effects come with being unhooked. They're just going to keep chasing that guy without understanding how difficult of a process that's going to be for them. You're not fixing the problem, Behavior, you're just making the new player experience worse because now there's even more unexplained shit going on. Throwing on more and more status effects isn't going to prevent tunneling. It's just going to keep new players in a state of limbo that stops them from getting comfortable with the mechanics of the game. While the new player experience isn't going to get much better because of these changes, the more avid players of the game are going to be having even worse of a time, at least on the killer end. While Behavior might think that new players or more casual ones are going to be having a better time when they're not at risk of being tunneled, that issue is going to increase tenfold for players that are more experienced at the game. Something that Behavior is apparently aware of. They themselves showed us that tunneling is much more prominent at higher level gameplay, which then begs the question, why the hell are we trying to coddle high level players? Those same players already know how tunneling works. They already know which perks to run to prevent that from happening. And those same players know that tunneling only really works if the other survivors on the team aren't being efficient on generators. Tunneling and camping is something that can be really hard to do if the other players on the team are competent enough to take hits and body block for their teammate, which is now even more punishing for the killer as survivors can now pick themselves up over time without any perks. It's easy to say, just don't tunnel, bro. And sure, maybe in some situations, yeah, but with how many pallets are on maps now and how gens fly by really quickly in a lot of games, regardless of how much pressure you're putting on the survivors at times, that's not exactly an easy thing to expect of most people, especially those of us who aren't willing to play only the top 5 strongest killers and no one else. If I'm playing Dracula every game, sure, I might not care about the tunneling and slugging changes, but I simply don't want to do that. My ass wants to play Bubba sometimes, a killer with no map traversal whatsoever. There have been so many games lately where I'm playing a weaker killer and I feel like I'm putting pressure on everyone non-stop. But 3 generators get done in the span of like 5 minutes, and there's not much more I can do past that. I'm trying my best, but the game doesn't seem to want to reward that. Seeing these changes frustrates me even more because while survivors can seemingly get all these buffs without behavior thinking they're too problematic, killers have been begging for years for something to be done to make their experience less aggravating. What do we get in return? 500 plus pallets a dick's length from each other. Fucking cool. Sure, a while ago generators were made to take a little longer to complete, but what is a couple extra seconds going to do when survivors are extending chases by minutes at a time due to the sheer volume of pallets? What are killers going to do against survivors who bring 4 brand new parts or 4 strong medkits? Behavior, you can't just take one side's problems into consideration without thinking about the other. This is an asymmetrical game. Asymmetrical. That means both sides have different problems, just in case you're unaware. To be honest, like a year or so ago, I wouldn't have gotten this heated about it. Killers had it pretty easy and things weren't too annoying to go up against. As someone who rarely tunnels unless I'm in a position where I feel like I need to, I couldn't give less of a shit about anti-tunnel perks. However, as this year has come and almost gone at this point, things have gotten increasingly problematic. Playing killer is now much more of a harrowing experience because I can see more and more of the cracks in my fun. There's only so many pallets you can break before you start asking, why? Why the hell am I putting up with this shit when I could just click on nurse or ghoul and have a much more enjoyable time playing the game? Why am I stressing myself out over playing nice when I know the same players I'm giving that treatment to would never do the same thing for me? Isn't my fun just as important as theirs? According to behavior, they don't seem to think so. They just want to take the shortest path to get from point A to point B without thinking about the player experience for both sides. A few more blood points and a bit of faster movement speed is not going to make up for the issues I see while playing killer. Issues that just keep piling on and on with no sense of stopping. Sure, this update isn't nearly as bad as their previous attempt with Sinister Grace, but that doesn't mean the fundamental flaws of how they're tackling this issue are completely gone. They're trying to do the most with the least amount of work, and it's really starting to show. I mean, the bugs alone are enough to get a rise out of me, but I know those at their core aren't intentional. This is, and it's very much worrying me. I'm on my knees begging you, behavior, please stop trying to coddle players and dumb down the core gameplay of Dead by Daylight in the worst possible way. I understand that the new player experience sucks, but there's a way to fix these issues without punishing the whole other half of the player base. Revamp your tutorial again, make the descriptions of killer powers much more understandable, explain macro play and smart decision making to players without doing it for them. Use tooltips to explain how certain aspects of the game work, show killers risks that come with tunneling and when and why to make that decision. And for the love of God, listen to content creators like Otts, Hens, Scott, and so many others. They know what they're talking about. I know you say you have consultants, but apparently they're not being listened to. Stop doing whatever you're doing. It is not working. Please. Hopefully you guys take some of that advice. Again, maybe these changes will be fine, but I'm just noticing an increasing trend of Dead by Daylight being much more of a taxing experience to play because things are getting so much more frustrating. Until then, that's it for me, gamers. Have a great day.